This slideshow advanced. This one, because I have today.
Today we're talking about the other two categories of macronutrients, that is fat and protein. Last time we talked about energy, and then there was the segment about carbohydrates, which I posted a recorded slideshow about, and you have watched it. In case you have any question about carbohydrates, please feel free to ask. Questions can come to your mind later, you can always ask. And same for today's topic, fats and carbo and protein. So we have 3 segments to cover today, 2 segments about fats and 1 about proteins. All right, let's begin with the fats. Learning objectives for today, for this part that is for fats. We want to name the different kinds of lipids and identify the kinds that are important for nutrition. So we'll see the relation between lipids and fats. We want to explain the molecular composition of triglycerides, which is the kind of lipids that are most important for nutrition, and those are the ones that we normally call fats, or fats and oils. And we want to distinguish the different types of fatty acids. We'll also see what is the relation between triglycerides or fats and fatty acids. We want to list the functions of fats in the body. We want to explain, we want to list the main food sources of the different kinds of fats and explain the difference between fats and oils in terms of the different melting points. And we want to explain what hydrogenated and trans fats are. We want to define rancidity and distinguish between lipolytic and oxidative rancidity. Okay? All right, lipids. So there are 4 kinds of lipids. Lipids are a very large group of molecules that are distinguished from the physical-chemical point of view by the fact that they are hydrophobic. They don't mix with water, they don't dissolve in water. And there are 4 major types of lipids, and they are triglycerides, phospholipids, steroids, and waxes. And the ones that are important for us, because they are found in food and in our body, are the first 3, triglycerides, phospholipids, and steroids. Okay? Waxes are relatively important for food packaging and processing as we will see. Now, what are triglycerides? Triglycerides are by far the most important of the 3 groups, of the 3 types of lipids, and they are the ones that we normally call fats and oils, or fats, simply fats. They constitute about 95% of the lipids in food, the remaining 5% being, a little bit phospholipids and the other bit steroids. They are commonly called fats and fats and oils, where we call them fats when they are solid at room temperature. They are typically soft solids, such as butter and lard. And we call them oils if they are liquid at room temperature, like vegetable oils, sunflower oil, olive oil, and so on. Phospholipids are molecules that are the constituents of the cell membranes. So you can understand how important they are for a living organism. They keep the cells together and they allow the traffic of molecules in and out of the cell. They control the traffic. Steroids are molecules that are for various types of functions. There is cholesterol. Cholesterol is also a precursor to vitamin D, which is one of the essential nutrients. It's classified as a nutrient and as a vitamin, but in fact, from the biochemical point of view, vitamin D is probably better classified as a steroid. We'll talk about it when we'll talk about minerals and vitamins. And then there's a group of hormones that are steroids. They're ones that are inaccurately called sex hormones, such as estrogen and testosterone. Among the waxes are substances that are derived from plants, mostly, and they're also derived from non-living matter. They're used in food processing. They're not relevant to nutrition, though. They are important to food science and technology. For example, encase certain types of cheeses, waxes are used. They're used for food packaging or to coat fruits to maintain the illusion of freshness. And they are indigestible for us. We don't digest them, that's why they're not important for nutrition. All right? So when we talk about food and nutrition, quite often the word lipids is used as a synonym for fats. Okay, and sometimes it's used to refer solely to triglycerides, and other times to include triglycerides, phospholipids, and steroids. So the distinction between lipids and fats is a bit blurry. It's just a matter of usage, and it is not exactly defined whether by lipids people mean simply the entire class of lipids or just triglycerides, phospholipids, and steroids. I will try to refer to most of the time to fats or triglycerides to make it clear what I mean. So since triglycerides are the fats that interest us, they are the fats, strictly speaking, and we want to define exactly what they are. So they are molecules that have a distinctive composition and structure. And they're formed by the bonding of two other molecules. Just like in the case of carbohydrates, carbohydrates are oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides are polymers made of monosaccharides, and disaccharides are pairs of monosaccharides. In the case of triglycerides too, we have the molecule of triglycerides being composed of molecular building blocks. And the molecular building blocks in this case for the triglycerides are called glycerol and fatty acids. And in one molecule of a triglyceride, there is one molecule of glycerol bonded to 3 molecules of fatty acids. And the shape is something similar to what is represented in the diagram there, where the glycerol forms a sort of a head, and the 3 fatty acids are like tentacles or legs dangling from that head. That's what the word triglyceride means. It refers to this kind of the structure, right? So when we talk about the molecular building blocks of triglycerides, what we mean is glycerol and fatty acids, okay? And I want to, this is one of the distinctions that I want you to keep very clear and present in your mind, the distinction between fats and fatty acids. They are not the same thing. Sometimes, actually quite often, fatty acids are also referred to as fats. But to be precise, fatty acids are one type of molecular building blocks of fats. They're not exactly the same thing. So different triglycerides contain different combinations of fatty acids. And this is really an important point. I want to stress it. In a molecule of a triglyceride, you can have three different fatty acids. Or you can have two fatty acids that are the same, and then the third one is different. And you can also have a fatty acid, a triglyceride in which all the three fatty acids are the same fatty acid. But most of the time, it's three different fatty acids. Most fats are mixtures of different triglycerides. So within every type of fat that you can use as a culinary food ingredient, we don't use typically fats as foods, straight fats as food. We eat them as components of foods, nutrients in foods, or we add them to dishes as culinary ingredients after they have been extracted from parts of plants and animals. But in any kind of fat, we find a mixture of different triglycerides, where each triglyceride can contain different types of fatty acids. All right? How do we distinguish different kinds of fats? We distinguish from the biochemical point of view, according to the sort of reductionist paradigm of modern nutrition science. We distinguish them by the prevalent kind of fatty acid that they contain. All right? So while in the fat you always have different kinds of fatty acids, there will be one kind that is more prevalent than the others. That is, you have more of that kind in that fat than the other fatty acids, and that is what then distinguishes the fat and allows the nutritional classification of the fat. So, since fatty acids are used to characterize the triglycerides, and let's focus on fatty acids. Okay? Let's focus on these molecular building blocks of fats. Fatty acids are constituted, but they can exist as independent molecules other than being molecular building blocks of triglycerides. And a molecule of fatty acid is constituted by a chain of carbon atoms. Okay? What's represented there is a sort of simplistic representation of a carbon atom. If you remember, I explained that carbon is so important to the molecules of life because it can form up to 4 bonds and therefore allow the formation of macromolecules that are quite stable. The backbone is a chain of carbons that is not easily broken. And so the 4 black sticks that get out of that red ball are meant to represent the 4 possible bonds that the carbon atom can form. So a carbon atom can link up with other carbon atoms to form a chain like that, using 2 or 1 of its bonds, all right? In a molecule of fatty acid, you have a chain of carbon atoms, and to each of the carbon atoms in the chain, 2 hydrogen atoms are attached to the remaining bonds, all right? So that is a very characteristic type of structure of a fatty acid. And then to complete the structure, we have the 2 ends. And the chain of carbon atoms has a variable number of carbons. That is, each fatty acid is characterized by its own number of carbon atoms. That's called the length of the chain. And then there are the 2 ends. And there is the alpha end, which is a carboxyl group. And then there is the omega end, which is a methyl group. That is, one is a carbon atom attached to 2 oxygen atoms, one with a double bond and the other one with a single bond, and then the oxygen atom attached to one final hydrogen atom. The methyl end is the final carbon atom on the other end attached to 3 hydrogen atoms. Right? So, fatty acids can be of short, medium, or long chain. There are short chain fatty acids, medium chain fatty acids, and long chain fatty acids. Typically, the number typically always the number of carbons in the carbon chain is in an even number. So if the carbons are from 4 to 6, we have a short chain fatty acid. If it is between 6 and 14, that is a medium chain carbon atom, and if it is more than 14, up to 22, it's a long chain fatty acid. All right. Then there is another thing that can distinguish, actually that does distinguish fatty acids. There are two major groups of fatty acids. They are both saturated and unsaturated. And in order to understand that classification, that subdivision of fatty acids, we have to understand that the carbons in the carbon chain can unlink to each other, either with single bonds, like it's represented at the top. Okay? Each carbon attaches to its neighbor carbons only with a single bond. But it is also possible that two carbon atoms attach to each other with a double bond, and thus, sort of leaving no bond for two hydrogen atoms. And the double carbon bond can be of two types. It can be cis if the hydrogen atoms that are attached to the two double bonded carbon atoms are both on the same side of the chain, as it is represented there, where cis means same side. Or it can be a trans double bond, where trans means across, where the two hydrogen atoms are instead on opposite sides of the carbon chain. Okay? And it is important to understand the distinction between normal fatty acids, because most of the fatty acids have the cis configuration if they have a double carbon bond, and trans fatty acids, which characterize the infamous trans fats, okay, which are a bad type of fat from the nutritional point of view. They are harmful to our health. They should be banned, and there are processes underway, proposals to ban them. And in fact, I think they have been banned in Canada. Okay, so now that we have the basics of a molecule of a fatty acid, we are ready to understand the classification of types of fatty acids. So we have, as I said, saturated fatty acids and unsaturated fatty acids. And let's see what that means. So in a saturated fatty acid, in the carbon chain, the carbons are attached only with single carbon-carbon bonds. There are no double bonds. Okay? And so the chain, the fatty acid, is as full of hydrogen as it can be. All the carbon atoms, each of them in the middle of the chain, have two bonds available, and those are attached to hydrogen. That's what saturated means. It means filled with hydrogen. And here is a sort of structural formula, a simple kind of structural formula of a saturated fatty acid. Okay, which is, in this case, it's a long chain fatty acid because it contains 16 carbon atoms. And as you can see, there are only single bonds between the carbon atoms. There's only just one sort of bar between each pair of carbon atoms representing single bonds. And so each of the carbons, other than the end carbons on the alpha end, each of them is attached to at least 2 hydrogens. And the one on the omega end is attached to 3 hydrogens. This is palmitic acid, one of the most common fatty acids. Then there are the unsaturated fatty acids, sometimes referred to with the acronym UFA. And in this case, there is at least one pair of carbon atoms that is bonded with a double bond. And there are 2 carbons that are more tightly attached together than the other carbons. And when that happens, the chain, which is normal, which is straight in the saturated fatty acids, bends a little, right at the point of unsaturation, right at the double bond. And the two carbons that have a double bond, each of them is only attached to one hydrogen, not to two. So that is what unsaturated means. It means that it has less hydrogen than it could have. Okay? It's not full of hydrogen. Among the unsaturated fatty acids, there are two subcategories, and they are called monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. Okay, now if you know what the prefixes mono and poly mean. Mono means one. So a monounsaturated fatty acid, or MUFA, using the acronym, is a fatty acid that only has one double carbon-carbon bond. Okay? A polyunsaturated is one that has more than one. You can have two or you can have three. Yeah, I think it's possible to have even more than, even though I'm not going to say confidently because I'm not sure about that. But at least three is definitely possible. And there will be a little dent in the chain at each point of unsaturation that is in the correspondence of each of the double bonds. So here in the diagram, we have the sort of two-dimensional structural formula of oleic acid, which is an 18-carbon monounsaturated fatty acid, which is the most common unsaturated fatty acid in food. There is unsaturated fatty acid in food. The unsaturated fatty acids are also classified according to what is the position of the double bond, counting the carbon atoms from the omega end. So in the oleic acid represented there, if you start from the omega end, you will see that the double bond corresponds to the ninth carbon in the chain. And so that is called an omega-9 monounsaturated fatty acid. If the carbon bond was in correspondence of the third carbon in the chain, it would be an omega-3. If it were on the sixth position, it would be an omega-6. So the one that's represented at the bottom, and the omega number refers to the first double bond starting from the omega end. So in the fatty acid represented at the bottom, you see the first double bond starting from the omega end comes after the third carbon atom. That's an omega-3 as polyunsaturated fatty acid, and it is alpha-linolenic acid, or ALA. It's one of the most important fatty acids because it is an essential fatty acid. So that comes now to the point where we have to talk about essential nutrients. Maybe I've already explained what an essential nutrient is. If I have, if this is a repetition and repetita human, the Latins say that is that things that are repeated are beneficial to students, meaning. Or if I haven't, this is the first time that I define it, it's even better because it needs to be defined. So a nutrient is called essential if our body cannot synthesize its molecules using other molecular bits present in our cells. Okay? And so if our body needs it because it's a nutrient, but it cannot make it from other molecular building blocks, then it has to get it from food. It has to be present in the diet. All right? So when we talk about essential nutrients, we are referring to nutrients that we necessarily need to intake with the food. There are other nutrients that our body needs, but the body is pretty versatile and it can use molecular bits from other molecules to fabricate them, right? And those are called non-essential nutrients. So the body is pretty good at converting fatty acids that it needs, taking other fatty acids, or even produce them from other molecular bits. But there are certain fatty acids that the body cannot make. And these are called omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. As far as I understand, the body has a limited capacity of producing omega-6s from omega-3s. So strictly speaking, only the omega-3s are essential. But since the capacity of making omega-6s is limited, it's not very efficiently. They are not very efficiently produced by our body, and the body needs omega-3s to make omega-6s. Both omega-3s and omega-6s are considered to be essential nutrients. And the most important, or the one that the body needs most, is the alpha-linolenic acid, or ALA. Okay, so any question about what I said so far? That's a classification of fatty acids. Okay, now let's move from the fatty acids to the fats. Okay, most fats in food as well as in our body contain mixtures of saturated fatty acids, monounsaturated fatty acids, and polyunsaturated fatty acids. So basically, there is no fat that only contains saturated fatty acids or only contains unsaturated fatty acids. We call the fat saturated or unsaturated depending on whether it contains mostly saturated or mostly unsaturated fatty acids. All right? So I have a table here that shows using sort of a bar diagram and colors. It shows the fatty acid composition of some common food fats. Right? So the color code here is that the sort of rust color, orangey brown color, represents saturated fatty acid. The green represents monounsaturated fatty acids, blue represents polyunsaturated omega-6 fatty acids, and orange represents polyunsaturated omega-3 fatty acids. Okay? So if we look at the animal fats and tropical oils, and that is fats that are derived from animals or from coconut and palm, those are called tropical oils, you will see that they contain mostly saturated fatty acids. That's why we call them saturated fats. And actually, according to this diagram, and that's always something that kind of perplexes me, pork fat, also called lard, in fact contains mostly unsaturated fatty acids. According to this diagram, while instead, of course, pork fat is considered to be unsaturated fat. Always when you hear or read about nutrition. So I don't have an explanation for that. The fat that contains the largest portion of saturated fat is coconut oil, followed by butter, and then beef tallow, which is beef fat, and palm oil, as you can see. If we look at the vegetable oils, then we see a prevalence of unsaturated fatty acids, where olive oil is very rich in monounsaturated fatty acids, and then the oils in the third block, sunflower, corn, soybean, walnut, and cottonseed oil have a prevalence of polyunsaturated fatty acids. Okay. But as you can see, all of these fats, which are the fats that we commonly eat and add, to create dishes with food ingredients, they contain mixtures of both saturated and unsaturated. So a food fat is commonly but inaccurately called saturated or unsaturated, and it can be called monounsaturated or polyunsaturated when it is high in the corresponding type of fatty acids. And since the 1960s, I think, nutritionists have pointed to saturated fats as causing cardiovascular disease, and unsaturated fats as protecting from cardiovascular disease. This is called the lipid hypothesis in nutrition, and it's one of the most contentious nutritional claims of modern nutrition science. While it is still considered to be standard, accepted knowledge in nutrition science that saturated fats, that is fats that are high in saturated fatty acids, are unhealthy because they cause cardiovascular disease, and that unsaturated ones are instead healthy because they protect against cardiovascular disease. That is contested. Many nutritionists disagree with that, and they say that in fact there is no scientific evidence to support the lipid hypothesis, this idea that saturated fats are unhealthy. What I can say for sure, other than pointing out the fact that this is an open question and a point that's very much open to debate to this day, I can say for sure two things. And one is that the demonization of fats in general and saturated fats in particular that has occurred starting in the 1960s and reached some peaks in the 1970s and early 80s has caused nutritional disasters in the modern industrial diet, because it has led to unwise replacements of saturated fats, so both saturated fats such as butter and lard, with industrially processed artificial types of fat, such as margarine, and we will see how margarine used to be made today, maybe with more sophisticated, methods. It has also led to the replacement of fat-rich foods with carbohydrates and sugar a lot for those people who have followed the low-fat fad, which is today recognized to have been a strong contributor to the epidemics of overweight and obesity in the world. Right? And the second thing that is certain is that despite all of this, the official dietary advice that is provided by governments here in Canada as well as in other countries still blames saturated fats and labels, brands saturated fats as bad fats, unhealthy, and the advice is to reduce the intake of saturated fats in the diet. Right? So, I certainly don't have the authority or the confidence to override the official advice. The best that I feel I can do is to point out that that advice is very much contested and controversial. So, okay, so now let's do some test practice together. And you know that our tests are multiple choice quizzes. And so this is going to be an exercise of answering multiple choice questions. To give all of you the answer to participate, just the people who are quick to raise their hand or that are close enough that I can hear the answers, let's try using my paper. Maybe some of you are already familiar with it, and I maybe instead you have never used it. But it should not be difficult to follow the instruction to use it. And since I myself am not very familiar with it, and I will have to read it from my laptop, so I'll give you time to try and log in following the instructions there. There is a page of the York University website of the IT Help section that gives you instructions on how to log in. Okay, so use the part that is for courses not using e-class information. So they give you a link to go to the page where you can log in. It should be possible for you to log in using your passport, your username and password, or set up an account using your email and password of your choice. Give me a signal that you've been able to log in. Here you can, I think you can also go directly to the student login page using this link here. If not, if you cannot log in, no worries. Okay, you can still participate. Since we haven't shown the questions on the screen, and you can still answer raising your hand. Okay? Answer to yourself and then follow the discussion.
There is
So anyone been able to log in? Yes? Have you found our course? Good. Can you see the question that I am showing from the laptop? Not yet? Okay, let me write it down. Can you see it now? Let's practice question one. Oh, yeah. Okay, all right. So here is what you should see. The same thing that's on the screen now should also appear on the icon window. Is that okay? Can you see it? And you can answer, right? So it's not important how to provide the answer. Yes, I'm starting to get responses.
It doesn't want to work.
I'm going to give you a minute. And we'll check the response. So what kind of lipids constitutes most of the lipids in our food and are commonly called fats? Okay, phospholipids, triglycerides, polysaccharides, or fatty acids. Okay. Okay, I get most of the answers, 84% for answer B, which is the correct one. Okay, so it's triglycerides. What we normally call fats, when we talk about it, are triglycerides. Some people have answered fatty acids, and that's not completely wrong. It's in fatty acids are like your building blocks of triglycerides. But when we talk about fats, we commonly refer to triglycerides. Okay. How is that this exercise? Is it working out for most of you? Shall we go on? Good. Okay, question number 2. Now you should see question number 2, which is this one. What are the molecular building blocks of fats? A, monosaccharides, B, triglycerides, C, phospholipids and steroids, D, glycerol and fatty acids. 99%, 90% of you now are giving the correct answer. It's not monosaccharides. Monosaccharides are the molecular building blocks of carbohydrates, not of fats or triglycerides. They're not triglycerides. Triglycerides are fats. It's not phospholipids and steroids, which are two other types of lipids. Okay, let's move on. Let's do question number 3. Sorry, question number 3 is here. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Can you see question number 3? No, yeah. Let me start this. Okay. What? Okay, question number 3. Question number 3. What distinguishes saturated from unsaturated fatty acids? Choose the best answer. Okay, so this is a question where it's possible that all the answers are correct. And if all the answers are correct, then the best answer is all the answers. The possible answers are the species of atom that they contain, the length of the carbon chain, the presence or absence of double carbon bonds, all the answers. So what distinguishes saturated from unsaturated fatty acids? That's the question. Right, so it seems that this question is more different than the previous ones because I am getting almost even spread of answers between C and D. So that means actually there is a majority of you who believes that all the answers are correct. While the correct answer is C. It's the presence or absence of double carbon bonds. Okay? Saturated fatty acids are the ones in which there are no double carbon bonds, only single carbon bonds. Unsaturated ones are the ones in which there is at least one double carbon bond. Right? It's not all the answers because all fatty acids contain the same species of atoms. They all contain carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, just like carbohydrates. The species of atoms are the same for all of them. The length of the carbon chain does distinguish a type of fatty acid from another, but that is not the classification of saturated and unsaturated ones. That is another classification based on the length of the carbon chain. So the correct answer is the presence or absence of double carbon bonds. Now, let's move on. This is question number 4 in the slide. Since I kind of fumbled a bit, it's question 7 in the so what distinguishes saturated from unsaturated fats? Okay, so pay attention here. A, the species of atoms that they contain. B, the length of the carbon chain. C, the presence or absence of double carbon bonds. D, the prevalent type of fatty acids that they contain. Okay, so here again, there's an almost even spread between C and D with just a few people answering A or only one A and a few B's. The correct answer is D in this case. Remember that I told you don't confuse fats and fatty acids. Okay, even though it is possible to talking about food and that fatty acid gets referred to or bunched into the category of fats, it's actually better to distinguish them, precisely for this reason here. A fat always contains a mixture of different types of fatty acids. Every type of fat will contain at least a few saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. It may contain a prevalent, a large number of saturated ones and few unsaturated ones, or vice versa. But there is no type of fat that we commonly consume that only contains saturated fatty acids or only contains unsaturated fatty acids. So it means that in every type of fat that we commonly consume, there is going to be either both single and double carbon-carbon bonds. Okay? It is the prevalence of the type of fatty acids that classifies the fat as being saturated or unsaturated. So if this point is still unclear, let me know. Okay, let's move on. The last of the questions that I have prepared is skip the number here, it should be question 5, and the number question 6, 9. What is an essential nutrient? A nutrient that our body needs and can synthesize from other molecules. B, a nutrient that our body needs that cannot synthesize from other molecules. C, an energy-giving nutrient that the body can synthesize. Sorry for the spelling mistake, from other molecules. D, a non-energy-giving nutrient that the body must obtain. What is the correct answer? Right, about half of you is giving the correct answer, which is B. And it's a nutrient that our body needs, but cannot synthesize from other molecules. Let me know if any of these questions or the answers are not clear. So now we do the last one. Let's practice question 7. What fatty acids are essential in human nutrition? A, monounsaturated fatty acids. B, palmitic acid and linoleic acid. C, linoleic acid and alpha-linolenic acid. D, omega-3, omega-6, and omega-9 fatty acids. Okay, what I'm seeing here is an even spread between C and D. The correct answer is C. C is the correct answer. The noise that's going on in the background. If the questions are not clear, or they're too easy, or they're too difficult, let me know, give me some feedback, and then let me know if you find this kind of exercise helpful. If it is helpful, we'll continue doing it, otherwise, it's a different way to practice. Alright, so that's the end of the first segment of today's class, and we still have some time before the break, so we're going to move on to the second segment, which is still about fats. Is there any questions about opening the second class? I can feel a lot of background noise. sitting close to you or in the rest of the class, they can see a lot, they can hear a lot of noise. So unless you have something further to say, and probably it's something that you may want to share with us, please try to be quiet to disturb the other students in the class. Okay, so this is the second part of our segment of class, our part of the doctoral class. So what are the functions of fats in the body? There are many important ones. The fats are concentrated sources of energy. Okay? We have seen that the standard value of metabolized energy for fats is how much? 9 what? Kilocalories per gram. Okay, always when you give a number, you need to give the unit to give a meaning to that number. It's very important. Remember that for the assignment. Never write a number without the unit because otherwise the number is meaningless. It's an abstract thing that doesn't connect to nutrition or food. It's the unit that made that connection. They are a source of energy, and they also serve inside our bodies to store energy when we eat energy in excess, or when we have plenty of food and our body doesn't need to use that food right away. Our physiology is capable of storing it, setting it aside for times of scarcity in our adipose tissue. Fat is also important for storage and transport of fat-soluble vitamins. Okay, once we will see vitamins are divided into 2 groups: the ones that are water-soluble and the ones that are fat-soluble. And the ones that are fat-soluble can be accumulated, stored inside the body, so we don't need to constantly replenish them. The part of our body that stores them is fat. Fatty acids are needed for cell membranes, to construct phospholipids for body tissues and bones, for the immune system, and for more. And where do we get the fatty acids from? We get them from fats, that is from triglycerides. Fat is needed for body insulation. Our adipose tissue insulates us thermally, that is from changes in temperature to maintain a stable internal temperature. But it is also needed, the fat is needed to cushion, to protect our inner organs. And then we should never forget that in fact food deprived of fat is not good to eat, and it doesn't trigger the feeling of satisfaction that's called satiety. It's the feeling of being full, the feeling of having eaten enough, that is produced by signals that arrive to our brain and tell us to stop eating. So when we eat food that is not capable of triggering that signal of satiety, then we have a tendency to keep eating and to overeat. And that is why low-fat foods have been one of the reasons why low-fat foods have been responsible for a lot of overconsumption in past decades. Palatability is just the tastiness of food, how good food is, which is also a very important part of psychological satisfaction that we get from eating. No one wants to eat a food that tastes bad, right? When food is taken away, is taken out of the fat artificially, then the food becomes unpalatable. No one would want to eat it. And so if a food manufacturer wants consumers to buy a food that's deprived of fats, they will have to add something else to make the food palatable. And typically what's been done in the past to low-fat foods is to add sugar to it to make it more palatable. And that has led to a situation where over 75% of industrially processed foods that are sold in stores today contain added sugars. And that is almost universally recognized to be one of the triggering causes of overconsumption and all the health problems that overconsumption causes. Now, we have been talking about fats, and we want to also connect fats to foods. So fats are among the foods that are part of our diet. When we consume fats, as I said, we practically never consume fats alone. We don't eat butter by itself, or oil. We don't drink oil by itself. We use them as culinary ingredients of dishes to add tastiness, to add palatability to food preparations that we make in our kitchens. But also they are components of many foods. So there are many foods from which we get the fats when we eat the foods, and there are many foods that are also used to extract the fats to be used as culinary ingredients. Sources of since in nutrition, there is this sort of standard classification of fats in the two groups of saturated and unsaturated, and the unsaturated into mono and polyunsaturated. So I also classified the sources of fats in that way. So sources of saturated fats are meats, suet and large, suet being the fat of beef, beef fat, that when it's rendered and then solidified is called tallow. Lard being pork fat that also gets melted and then preserved in a sort of solid, in the form of a soft solid. Batter and whole milk, which is the source of batter, or partially skimmed milk. Milk can be processed in such a way as to take the fat away from it. The fatty part of milk is called cream. If you let raw milk sit, because you milk a cow and you have the milk in a container and let it sit for even just a brief time, I think an hour or a couple of hours, the milk will start to separate, and the fatty part of the milk will float to the top, and a more watery part will be left at the bottom. And after a certain time, there will be a thick layer of cream floating at the top of the milk, which is the fatty part of the milk. That is how cream is made, by taking that fatty layer, and butter is produced by churning with cream, that is by extracting water from cream. So whole milk is definitely a source of fat, and the fat that it mostly contains saturated fatty acids. So milk fat is classified as saturated fat. When the milk is only partially skimmed, that is, not all the fat is being taken out of it, and partially skimmed milk in the standard types that are sold in our stores can be 2% fat or 1% fat. Is also a source of saturated fat, even though in lower quantities. And milk products that are made from whole milk or partially skimmed milk are also sources of saturated fat. And then there are the tropical oils. That is the oils that are extracted from coconut and from palm fruit. What are the sources of unsaturated fats? Well, here we talk about monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. So the main sources of monounsaturated fats are olive oil, olives, from which olive oil is extracted, and peanuts, from which peanut oil can be extracted, or from which peanut butter can be made, and canola oil. Which someone asked me what canola oil is made of. Well, we'll talk, even if you don't ask now, at some point you will hear what canola oil is and then avocado, from which also avocado oil can be extracted. And then there are polyunsaturated fats, and some of the most important sources of polyunsaturated fats like fish and seafood, nuts and seeds, and all the other vegetable oils, other than that is coconut oil, palm oil, and olives, peanuts, and avocado. That is soybean oil, and all, as you can see, is in both categories, in the monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, because it contains just about the same amount of monounsaturated fatty acids and polyunsaturated fatty acids. Corn, sunflower, sesame, etc. Okay? All right. Any question about that? Yes? Sorry, you guys are very loud. Yes, that's one of the reasons. So the dietary advice to reduce the consumption of meat has actually more than one reason. And the fact that it contains saturated fat is one of the reasons. As far as I understand, even independently of the fat content, overconsumption of the so-called red meats, that is beef and pork, is associated with increased risk of chronic diet-related chronic diseases. Today, there is a strong movement that recommends the reduction of the consumption of meat for reasons other than the healthiness of meat as part of a diet, having to do, additional to the healthiness or unhealthiness of meat as part of the diet, that are related to the environmental damage and resources consumption of large-scale animal farming, so factory farms and industrial animal farming that are being recognized quite widely as one of the major sources of greenhouse gases and land consumption. In terms of land, that causes deforestation, and also they are a major source of waste, excess waste being produced. Are there any other questions about what we said in terms of different types of fat, classification of fats into saturated, unsaturated, and of the unsaturated into mono and polyunsaturated? So let's talk about the melting point of fats, which is important for cooking. So all fats contain mixtures of saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. Okay? And the type of fatty acids that are prevalent will give the fat its physical characteristics. You can recognize whether a fat is saturated or unsaturated actually without most of the time without the help of chemical analysis, by observing whether it is solid or liquid at room temperature. Saturated fats are solid at room temperature. Solid meaning soft solids. Butter, lard, coconut oil. I'm not sure about palm oil because I've actually never used it. Maybe you're familiar with it and you can tell me whether it's solid at room temperature or not. Why is it so? Because the presence of saturated fatty acids, especially the long chain ones, raises the melting point of the fat. You'll remember when we talked about the phases or states of matter, we defined the phase transitions and the various points of at which different substances transition from one stage to the other. The melting point is the temperature at which at normal atmospheric pressure a substance passes from the solid to the liquid form. and vice versa. At exactly the melting point, there is an equilibrium, a coexistence of the solid and of the liquid form. So the higher is the melting point, the more likely it is that the substances in the solid form are the temperatures at which we normally find it, right? When you have fat, in which there is a prevalence of saturated fatty acids, the melting point tends to be higher, and that is why the fat is solid at room temperature. If you raise the temperature, for example, putting it in a pot or a pan and turning on the heat, then you melt the fat. And you know that very well. It's a common starting point of cooking that of melting another butter or a dollop of lard. Fats that contain prevalently unsaturated fatty acids instead have a lower melting point, and that is, their melting point is lower than room temperature. And so at room temperature, they are liquid. Oils are fats that are liquid at room temperature. That is, they have a melting point that's lower than room temperature. But they can also become solid if you lower the temperature. So if you put a bottle of olive oil, for example, outside the window in winter time, you will see it solidifying. It's a process that's a freeze condition, just like the freezing of water. Olive oil solidifies below 4 degrees Celsius. 4 degrees Celsius is more or less the temperature of a fridge. You will see the oil solidifying also if you put it inside the fridge. In summertime, if you have a jar of coconut oil that is not kept in the fridge, you will see the coconut oil become liquid. Or your butter will become very soft if you don't keep it in the refrigerator. So that's an important thing to know about fats when you cook. What is the melting point? Okay, so let's do the review together. What are the functions of fats in the body? This is not a multiple choice. You will have to answer. With your voice. The other functions of fat. Yes. Sorry, did you? Sorry, just a second. Were you raising your hand? No. Yes. Yeah, it works as an insulator for the body. Yeah. And yes, energy storage, long-term energy storage. Yes. It protects the organs. Now, please, concentrated source of energy when it comes from food. Yes, exactly. So energy storage inside the body and a source of energy when we eat it. Then, anything else? Yes. Palatability, yes. Someone missed that in there, or it was just my impression? Yes. So, yes, provides, the molecular building blocks for cell membranes. Did you raise your hand too? Insulation, yes, that was the right side. Right. Transport and storage of fat-soluble vitamins, very important. So here is another thing that happens when you take fat away from food. You take away the fat-soluble vitamins with it. Okay, so it becomes nutritionally deprived also because it will contain fewer vitamins. That's why, for example, it's mandatory in Canada to fortify with added vitamin A, skim milk, and powder milk also needs to be re-added with vitamin C. It has evaporated when the water is taken out. But if you skim the milk, if you take the fat out, you take out the vitamin A, which is a fat-soluble vitamin, and so by law, the A vitamin needs to be added back to the milk. the different kinds of fats, and I will leave that for you as an exercise. It's just a matter of learning what is in the slides or what can be found actually from any other sources of information. What is the difference between saturated and unsaturated fats at the molecular level? This is the question that I want to answer to clarify once more a point that I've been insisting on and that may be not really clear. Yes?
Is the only type that's like it's a single or double carbon one?
Don't confuse fats and fatty acids. Right? So the purpose of this exercise is that of reinforcing that distinction. This question is about fats. The question, what is the difference between saturated and unsaturated fats at the molecular level? So you're going to say that saturated fats do not contain double carbon bonds. Am I correct? Am I guessing right? What you were trying to say? Yeah. That would be incorrect. You would be correct. Yes. It's the prevalent type of fatty acids that they contain. So even a saturated fat will contain double carbon bonds because it will contain some unsaturated fatty acids. Right? So when you talk about fat, you always have to remember it's going to be a mixture of different types of fatty acids. Right? You cannot say that saturated fats do not contain double carbon bonds. The fat is the overall, it's the triglycerides. Instead, if the question was what's the difference between saturated fatty acids and unsaturated fatty acids, then it would be correct to say saturated fatty acids do not contain double carbon bonds. Okay? And how can you distinguish saturated from unsaturated fats? In your kitchen, that is not at the molecular level. Yes? Yes?
Based off of room temperature, because saturated fats at room temperature are solid, unsaturated are liquid.
Good. And saying that in just slightly more technical way, using the terminology that I would like you to start learning. You're not raising the melting point. The melting point is the same. The only way you could raise it is by changing pressure. But in your kitchen, you normally don't do that. You can recognize them by their melting point. That is, what is the temperature at which they're solid, and then what is the temperature at which they're liquid. All right? Okay, so I think it's time to take a break, and there's one more bit of the fats that we need to talk about, and that is about cis and trans fatty acids, and then we'll talk about proteins.
I'll set a timer for 9 just in case.
I will. ક્લાસમાં છે
You call it and then call me back.
ઓ ઇઝી ને વર્જિનલ ને એને કામ કંપનીનો તમે મને મેસેજ કર્યો તેના પર તે જોયું કે નહીં ગ્રુપ પરથી ઇમ્પોર્ટન્ટ વસ્તુ છે આપણા ગ્રુપમાં મસ્ત કેલેન્ડરમાં હું બૂમા બૂમ નહીં કરતો મને કીધું ને બોલી તને પાર્ક કરવા કીધું હતું ને એ બહુ મોડવાઈ ગયો તો મેં એને પૂછ્યું મેં તો કેમ ગયેલો હતો તો બોલતું બરાબર બધું ગણ્યું એ શું પેલી ગયા પછી કીધું પછી એવા એટલે જાણી જોઈને જતો આજે મારે કેમ ટેમ્પલને જઈને જાણી જોઈને તો મેં તો બી નહીં બ્રેક મેં તો મારે ચોખ્ખો હતો મને પછી એને ફોન કર્યો મેં ક્લાસમાં જગ્યા રોકી ગયો ને બહુ બધા જગ્યા બહુ બધી ફરાય છે મેં તો આવી રૂમમાં રહેતા મેં કોની બેડરૂમની યરદા હાથ જો એટલે હજુ લઈ જાય હજુ તું લઈ જાય
Yeah, that's what Kim said. She said you just take your clothes back and then keep theirs.
મેં કીધું ને એને કેમ ખબર કે તું કાં છે પણ એ બધું મને મને તો રાતના કીધું કે તમે રાતના જ ફોન કહું કે મેં બહુ વહેલું નીકળ્યું બે માતા બિચારવાનું એટલે મને યાદ નહીં રહ્યું ઇન્સ્ટાગ્રામ હું હોડી લાવું આ બધા સ્કૂલમાં વસ્તુ તો કહેવાનું તમે ભૂલી પણ ચાલુ થઈ ગયો તારી વાર મારો રાખતા હું રમવા જવાનું કોણ રમવા જવાનું કેટલા વાગે કેટલા 5 વાગે એક કલાક માં તો એક કોર્સની ઓકે ઓકે ના કેમ હા વળી તો ભરતી જાય English people come
It's a better word.
જો પોતાની ઘરના સોંગમાં ને ગીતમાં પગે બધાને પૂછે
What?
એ મીઠા તો કંઈ ખાવા જતો
No, I was because
ખાવા જતો
no, because I tried Wi-Fi and get these pants and I like a lizard fit on.
અને એમાં મને બને ભાઈ એપ્લિકેશન સિવાય તો એટલી દોસ્તર હું કામ
I'm up.
સારું ત્યારે જો કે કાલે કરાવી
I'm up and down my waist.
Like you're all the rest of the
કાલે લાઇબ્રેરીમાં કોણે બોલાવ્યું
Yeah.
એ પણ એને કીધું કે ઓબ્વિયસ સમથિંગ એટલે મારી કન્ડિશન એવી રીતે નહીં કે પ્લીઝ મીટ કેન યુ કમ ટુ ACW109 outside and I will get the food. ભાઈ લેક્ચરમાંથી ડાયરેક્ટ જમવા એટલે એક દિવસનો લેક્ચર મિસ થાય ને આ લોકો નોટ્સ લઈ લે એ નોટ્સ લઈ લે ને નોટ્સ જ તો લેવાની હું કાઢું ખાસું ખબર હોય નહીં કરવા આખું જોયું અંજલાડું આખું ખબર હોય નહીં કરવા વસાઈ વસાઈ હલો વસાઈ મેં કીધું કે મોટું લેક્ચર શું તમે સ્વીકાર કરે તો વસાઈ આપણે નોટ લઈ લે ખાલી ઓકે હું કરીએ કરતો તું 4:30 વાગે
When I talked to her, I told her nothing, and went in right away. I'm like, perfect.
તું કહે પછી નીકળ
She already has one.
કોણ નીકળાય નીચે કોઈ સમય બ્રેક છે 3 કલાક ભાઈ મારી બીજી મિનિટમાં તમને મેં તમને કીધું ને સેવા તમને આપી ઇન્ટરેક્ટ કરી દેવા હું ચાલુ ભાઈ નીકળે તું તો ખાવાના હોય નહીં તો તું ઘરે નહીં તારો ફ્રેન્ડ પણ આવવાનો હા તો એ તો નહીં ચાલુ કર પણ લાઈન કેટલી મોટી
Exactly something. Yeah.
સહ લાઈન તો હોવાની ને જ્યાં ટેપ કરવાની
Lying.
કે છે મેં કેમ નીકળા તારો કયો ફ્રેન્ડ આવ્યો તેને કે ને ગાડીમાં લેવા આવી જાય એને કે અડધર વચ્ચે મને પિકઅપ કરી દો ખાલી ગામમાં અડધર વચ્ચે એટલે સબ સ્ટેશન પાસે હા ચાલ નો
I know Timothy like a register. I don't hear any buzz.
કે મોટું આજે બહુ મોબાઈલમાં ને પેલું ઇંગ્લિશમાં આવવાનું
Ew, why is this on my Instagram?
એટલે તમે હડકોનો પણ કામ કરો તૈયાર
It's on bar down. I swear to God, both of those two stereotypes are talking. Remember his jersey number? Ron 18. Number 3 is Justin Paul. Oh. You know the LTIR loophole? Basically, they put someone who would be out for like a short period of time on LTIR just to get some cap space.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And that's what they have to do with Carey Price. They're probably gonna put him on LTIR just to, or they might put Sean Monahan on LTIR just to get some cap space. Price and Monahan. Yeah, they both have it. A lot of my friends are Habs fans. I'm sorry, that's disgusting. No one in my friends group likes sports. It's like, Oh, now you have to work out. And it's something to believe spend. Literally, I was like so scared because I thought you were ad spend. Legit, like I was like, oh my god, please, yeah, please. I was like, please be a leaf spend, please be a leaf spend. Like seriously. Everyone's touching each other. I'm not sure.
Like I checked it, like, but that's showing me that it's like written in outline, but it's not there. There is no topic like on which assignment would be.
She might not have like made it visible to us yet. She probably didn't make it visible to us yet.
Oh, okay, yeah. So whenever time comes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. I didn't even know academic presentation. Yeah. For my sexuality studies. Thankfully, we can talk about what is it against sport? Okay.
So, many of you during the day have asked about assignment number 1, which is due October 5th, am I correct? I think it is. So, assignment number 1 is not posted yet. It's going to be posted this weekend. Sometimes during the weekend when I manage to finalize the file. You will find the file in the assignment section, and you will download the file, and the file contains the questions that you have to answer. So all you have to do is just add your answers below each of the questions in that file. Save the file in the same format. Don't change the format. Don't make it a PDF. Don't make it zipped. And then upload the file in the same format to the module that's called assignment 1. Okay? That module is Turnitin inbox. Turnitin, I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, is a software that is used as a tool to help you not to commit plagiarism, which is an academic offense. When you copy parts of your answers or closely paraphrase parts of your answers from another source without acknowledging that that answer is not yours, but you are actually taking it from someone else, that is plagiarism. And it is an academic offense, and it can land you in serious trouble if you do that, because it's a form of cheating. And I know that you don't want to cheat, and you don't want to help anyone to cheat. So Turnitin is a way to help you not to make that mistake. What Turnitin does in itself, it does not detect plagiarism. It matches your text, the file that you will submit, to a very large number of other files from students from this class, from students from previous classes, and from other courses, and from a lot of other documents that Turnitin has in its database. And when Turnitin finds bits of text that are identical, it will highlight them. And then it calculates what percentage of your file matches other documents. So at the end, you will receive a report, which is called a similarity report, and a score, which is called the similarity score. The similarity scores will appear in percentage form, and it tells you what percentage of your file is identical to other documents in the Turnitin database. Per se, the similarity score does not mean plagiarism or not plagiarism. It means nothing, okay? And it's probably going to be relatively high for our assignments because you're writing your answers in the same file, basically. So all your files will have certain parts that are all identical. And depending on the length of your answers, the percentage of identical text can even more than 50%, all right? If you are worried and you see a high similarity score, open up the report to see what parts of your file are identical to other files or other documents. If the parts that are highlighted are only the questions or the other common parts of the file, that obviously is perfectly legitimate. There is nothing to worry about. If there are parts of your answers that are highlighted, but they are the proper terminology of the course, for example, unsaturated fats or essential nutrients or other terms like that, just bits of these terms, proper terms that you should be using inside your answers, that's perfectly fine. But if there are entire sentences that are highlighted, or entire paragraphs that are highlighted, or combinations of words that are sort of, not strange but unique and not common, then that may signal the fact that you are not writing your own answers, but you are copying them or paraphrasing too closely from a source, right? So in that case, you have to rewrite the answer in your own words. In the assignment section, you'll find supporting material, and one of the supporting documents is the marking rubric that tells you how is your assignment going to be assessed, how is the grade going to be assigned. And it's going to be assigned on the basis of your answers demonstrating that A, you know the course content that is covered by that assignment, B, you understand it, all right? And in order to demonstrate that you know it and you understand it, you have to write the answers in your own words. If you copy the answers, you're demonstrating neither of those two criteria, right? So always aim to show with your answers your knowledge and your understanding. So make yourself shine in your answers, all right? And don't try to get a good grade by imitating someone else. The first way to commit an academic offense is by imitating someone else in your answers, rather than giving your own answers. And you can also, get a poor grade if you closely paraphrase the course readings. Because if you too closely paraphrase the course reading, you're not showing that you understand that. And you're just showing that you're kind of able to mechanically summarize or paraphrase by changing one word here and there, right? There's another way in which you can commit an academic offense, and that is if you aid and abet plagiarism of another student. And that can be done, it is unfortunately done, when students upload their files to one of those predatory websites that promise you some kind of benefit if you upload course material to their sites. I'm talking about Course Hero and other similar sites. So if you do that and you upload your answers there, your file with the answers there, then someone else downloads it, copies your answers, you get in trouble with them because you have aided plagiarism. And that is an academic offense too. Or you can, for example, I hope you will not, but you can commit aiding and abetting plagiarism if you, thinking that you are are helping a friend, you email or pass your file to a friend or to someone who has asked you. Okay? So you get a frantic phone call the night of the deadline of the assignment, or someone says, please help me, I did not have time to do the assignment, so why don't you send me your file to help me write my answers. And it does happen that a good student who has studied, who has written their answers in the proper way, trying to help someone else, has passed the file to another student, the other student copied the answers or paraphrased them too closely, and then both got in trouble. And that is terrible, and it's really painful to have to undergo consequences because you were trying to help. That is not a good way to help. A good way to help is if you want to study with someone else and discuss the question and the answers with someone else, that's great, but then when it's time to write the answers, each one of you has to write independently their own answers, or have your friends or other students in the class referring them to the proper course material, or referring them to the teacher when something is difficult or unclear. All right? Okay. So I really hope that none of you will run into that kind of problem. And in terms of the similarity score, that is the proper way of using it. If you have written your own answers, there is no reason for you to, and if you have not shared them with anyone, there is no reason for you to worry about the similarity score. A couple of other words of advice. In Turnitin, for the way in which the assignment is set up, you can resubmit before the deadline. So if you realize you can submit the draft, then improve it, and then resubmit the final version, or you submit what you think is the final version, and then you realize that you forgot something, and you can edit your answer and resubmit. And you can resubmit as many times as you want, up to the deadline. After the deadline, you can still submit. You will get a late penalty. If the delay is small, the late penalty is irrelevant and can even be condoned. If the delay is more significant, then the late penalty begins to be significant. But nonetheless, it's better to get the late penalty than not to submit, right? But after the deadline, if you submit, you cannot resubmit. Okay, so if you are submitting after the deadline for whatever reason, be sure that you are submitting your final file. Okay. You can before the deadline, you can submit as many times as you want. You can resubmit as many times as you want. But after the third time, Turnitin will make you wait 24 hours before giving you the similarity report. There's normally a time lag between the submission and the similarity report because the software has to do the matching, and that time lag can be shorter or longer depending on how busy the program is. But after the third resubmission, and there is a standard wait time of 24 hours. That is to prevent students to just randomly trying to change words in their answers in order to lower the similarity score. Okay? Anything that is not clear or anything else that you would like to know about the practicalities of submitting the assignment? So the assignment will be posted shortly, so you will be able to read the answer, the questions, that is. If anything in the questions or in the instructions is unclear, please ask me. Okay? Email me, I'll do my best to answer to you promptly, or come next week to student hour or come to class and ask me. The percentage of similarity really depends on the file itself, how long the questions are going to be, and how long your answers are. All right. So if you write in a very concise way and your answers are short, and the questions are very long, it's possible that in fact you get a similarity score that's close to 50% without any problem, just because the answers are short, the questions are long, the questions obviously are identical for all the students in the class, so the similarity score is going to be high. But if you start to get a similarity score that's actually that high, you have to ask yourself if your answers are too short. That maybe your answers are incomplete, okay? So it depends on your answers. That is not an answer that I can give to you. You will have to really begin thinking, did I answer all the question completely? Some of the questions will be composed of sub-questions. There will be more than one part in the question, so be sure to answer all the sub-parts of all the questions. It's only the last submission that gets graded. Yes. So when you resubmit, the previous submission is erased. It's no longer there. All right? So it's only the last one that gets graded. Yes. If you know what the deadline is, you will have the assignment questions ready, in time for you to have enough time to write your answers, to ask questions. If anything happens and you realize that you're not going to make it by the deadline, you're not going to be able to submit in time by the deadline, do get in touch with me before the deadline and we will talk about the accommodation, okay? Don't get into a panic at the last minute. That is, don't start thinking about the assignment too late so that you will necessarily get into the last minute panic, because that's when mistakes are made and when students make bad decisions, for example, about yes, did you have a question?
Do you all lose marks for having too high of a Turnitin score?
No, the Turnitin score, does not have any kind of direct link to your mark, not at all. If we see a Turnitin score that's high, we check the similarity report to see why it is that high. But in itself, the Turnitin score does not signify anything. Any other questions? Okay. So, yes, I'm back up there. Please speak loud. Didn't hear you.
When's the due date?
The due date is October 5th, am I right? Please, those of you who have the course on, they can check on the course. I will check it together. It's October 5th. Yeah. So it is the Wednesday before the class after the next class.
All right.
At the end of the day.
Okay.
Okay. Yes. 11:59 p.m. So here is something that I've actually already discussed at the beginning of class. Saturated fats are officially labeled as bad fats. That is, fats that are not good for you and that you should reduce and possibly even completely eliminate from your diet. Okay? That is not said explicitly in your official dietary advice, but since there is no lower limit that is set, it is implied that if you eliminated saturated fat completely from your diet, that would be good for you. But as I said, and as I expressed that with a question mark, not everyone agrees on this point. All right. So since the 1970s, official dietary advice brands saturated fats as bad fats and recommends limiting them in your diet. So in the last edition of Canada's Food Guide, which is the official Canadian set of dietary advice, from committees of experts appointed by the federal government. In this latest edition, the message of reducing saturated fats, because they are healthy, is actually even more emphasized than ever. So here you have one part, one reproduction of a part of the Canada's food guide that says limits foods high in sodium, sugars, or saturated fat. Okay? So sodium, sugars, and saturated fats are bad nutrients that you should limit in the diet. Yet, several recent meta-studies have reported that there is no scientific evidence to support this advice. So that piece of advice about saturated fat is a contested one. Meta-studies are studies made by experts, by scientists, who analyze the data coming from large numbers of previous studies. So these are studies that are not based on a new experiment or a new clinical test, but are based on statistical analysis of a large number of previous studies. Okay? So if the statistical analysis is done correctly, they should be relatively reliable in terms of the evidence, and several have been published and more being published that say that in fact, if you do this analysis of the studies that have been done, the result is that there is no scientific evidence that supports that advice. So what's the conclusion there? The conclusion is that this is a case when there is no consensus among the experts. There is a debate that's still open. It's one of those cases when the best thing that we could actually say is that we don't really know. Okay? That's the official advice, and now I told you what it is, and I also told you that there are many experts who disagree with that advice. And I don't know what the correct answer to the question, are saturated fats bad for you is. But I do know something else, and that has to do with another kind of fats that are in fact unsaturated, but with another kind of fats that contain unsaturated fatty acids of a type that is definitely bad for you, for which there is plenty of evidence and there is no doubt. On which everyone agrees that they are bad for you. These are called the trans fats. And before we can understand what trans fats are, we have to understand the process of hydrogenation. What's the process of hydrogenation? It's an industrial process by which unsaturated fats are turned into saturated fats. And why would any industry or food manufacturer want to do something like that? Well, the answer is simple, because unsaturated fats are generally less expensive, because they are more easily produced, and they are produced with crops that are often subsidized by governments, such as soy or corn. Therefore, they are produced from raw materials that are relatively inexpensive. And they can be processed through hydrogenation using economies of scale, so that the process itself is not expensive. And so they can be produced in a profitable way, at low cost. And it can be sold to the public at a low cost, but maintaining a good margin of profit for the manufacturers. Moreover, the process of saturating the fat, that is adding hydrogen to it, that is essentially what it is, makes the fat more stable from the point of view of preservation, less prone to become rancid, to go bad, that is. And it gives it a texture that makes it more suitable for certain food preparations, for baking, for example. Because texture of lard or butter. So there are various reasons why food manufacturers want to apply this process to vegetable oils, relatively inexpensive vegetable oils that are naturally unsaturated fats. The process consists of the exposure of the oil at to hydrogen at high temperature and high pressure in the presence of a catalyst. Remember that a catalyst is a substance that favors certain chemical reactions without actually being part of the reactants or of the product. So it's just there to facilitate or to accelerate the reaction by helping with the breaking of the bonds of the molecules of the reactant. So when you do that with a unsaturated fatty acid, you break the double carbon bonds. Okay? When you break the double carbon bonds, two of the carbon atoms gain bonds that are free to link up with hydrogen. So if you expose the fat to hydrogen and break the double carbon bonds, then you favor the forming of a saturated fatty acid molecule, where the carbon atoms are attached to as many hydrogens as possible. Right? That's what hydrogenation is. It's the saturation of fatty acids with hydrogen. Now, hydrogenation is never total, complete. Okay, it's never going to, be practiced in such a way that all these double carbon bonds in the oil are broken and all the fatty acids become saturated. It's always partial. And another reason why food manufacturers like this process is that they can actually decide what degree of saturation to apply to the oil according to what the purposes are, what they want to do, right? So that's the molecule of the fatty acid after it has been saturated through this process, right? So the food industry used partially hydrogenated fats to make margarine. That's how margarine was made. Margarine has the appearance and the consistency of butter, but it is made from vegetable oils, from corn oil or soy oil or other kinds of inexpensive vegetable oils through the process of hydrogenation. Okay? Margarine was used to make baked products such as crackers or cookies or cakes, but it was also sold as a substitute for butter during the 1970s and the 1980s when nutritionists offered as the official dietary advice the advice to reduce the consumption of butter because butter was a saturated fat. Okay? Margarine could be publicized as being less saturated than butter and being of vegetable origins that the manufacturers advertised as being a good thing for the oils, containing more unsaturated fatty acids, which were publicized as being healthy and protective of your cardiovascular system. So margarine got first marketed as healthier than butter. Okay. So as I said, let me repeat here, I don't know whether a diet that's high in the consumption of butter or lard is healthy or unhealthy, right? What I do know is that a diet that replaces butter and lard with margarine, as the margarines were made in the 70s and 80s, is not healthy. In fact, it has been found that was certainly the case. And now the use of partially hydrogenated fats is banned in Canada. So why partially hydrogenated fats are unhealthy? Well, because they end up containing a new kind of fatty acids that and those are called trans fatty acids. Okay? So remember what I said when I talked about double carbon bonds, and I said that they can exist in two forms, in two isomers. They can be cis or trans. If at the point of the double carbon bond, the hydrogen atoms are attached on the same side of the carbon chain, then the molecule is a cis molecule. If then instead they are attached so that the two hydrogen atoms are on opposite sides of the carbon chain, that's a trans fatty acid. And it's a trans molecule. Right? So what's represented there is a cis molecule. If you, during the process of hydrogenation, break the carbon bond, what can happen to that molecule is, in fact, that the molecule flips over, gets twisted, it reattaches in the trans configuration. Okay? So when you break the double carbon bond, it is possible that, and it does happen, that instead of the dangling bonds from the carbon atoms attaching to hydrogen, what happens is that the molecule flips over, gets twisted, and reattaches the double bond in the trans configuration. That is a trans fatty acid. Okay? Now, so that's another diagram that shows a cis isomer, and that's the trans isomer. Right? Now, it's not that trans fatty acids do not exist in nature. They do exist. They, for example, can be found in small quantities completely naturally in milk, and therefore also in butter and in milk products. But when they exist in nature like that, no one has ever found that they are associated to any negative health effect. While instead, the ones that are produced artificially through partial hydrogenation, now we have a lot of data to show that they are associated with the incidence of diet-related chronic diseases, and they are basically toxic for you. So to consume margarine and other partially hydrogenated fats is definitely unhealthy, definitely bad for you. And that's why partially hydrogenated fats are being banned, because they contain trans fatty acids, or the trans fats as they are commonly termed. And if you look at the nutrition facts table on food labels of packaged foods, trans fats are singled out, and manufacturers now they have to declare what is the amount of trans fats that are present in those foods, in any certain portion of those foods, to warn consumers that the trans fats are present there. So these industrial byproducts, that is the trans fatty, artificial trans fatty acids, raise the risk of heart disease, inflammation, type 2 diabetes, and possibly even cancer, right? So here is just another slide that repeats the same concept, showing you the representation of a cis form of a fatty acid, where only carbon atoms are represented. The two carbon atoms on the top there are bonded by a double bond. You can see two little bars represented, bonding them together. And hydrogen atoms are only represented for those two top carbon atoms to show that they are on the same side of the carbon chain. And then the bottom diagram represents a trans form of fatty acid, where you can see there are two carbon atoms in the middle that are double bonded, and the two hydrogen atoms are shown attached to them but on opposite sides of the carbon chain. Okay? Yes, there is a hand up there. Yeah. Please, louder. What catalysts are used? Oh, okay, that's a difficult question. I don't know what catalysts are used. I will look it up. I'll try to remember and look it up. I don't know what catalysts are used. Nor do I know, and this was asked in the summer course, and that was a good question. I did not find the time for the answer. So now that partial hydrogenation is banned in Canada, you still see margarine being sold at the store. But those margarines are no longer made to partial hydrogenation. So the students ask, how are they made now? Evidently, there are new processes, other processes that are capable of giving vegetable oils that soft, solid consistency to make margarine. But I don't know what processes are used. I will try to look for the answers for these questions. If I find, I will let you know. Okay, so trans fats are fats that contain trans fatty acids, which can be natural or artificial. Natural trans fatty acids are found in small amounts in milk and dairy products, also in beef and lamb. Artificial trans fatty acids are formed during the industrial processing of food, namely partial hydrogenation. So some of these trans fatty acids are unavoidably formed in small amounts while the vegetable oils are refined, such as canola or soybean oil, but mostly they are produced from partially hydrogenated fats. Artificial trans fatty acids, well, this is repetitive and just repeating things, they are unhealthy. They lower the level of good cholesterol, which is called high density lipoprotein cholesterol, HDL, and raise the level of bad cholesterol, LDL, low density lipoprotein cholesterol in the blood. They raise the risk of heart disease, inflammation, type 2 diabetes, and possibly cancer. And since the early 2000s, it's mandatory to declare the quantity of trans fats in food products. As of 2018, in Canada, partially hydrogenated fats are classified as contaminants and adulterating substances and are banned from food. Okay, so now let's talk about rancidity. What's rancidity? Rancidity is a breaking down of the fatty acids in fats. There are two types of rancidity. There is lipolytic rancidity, where it is certain microbes that produce an enzyme called lipase that breaks the triglycerides into short fatty acids. And this is a process that occurs naturally and gives characteristic flavors of to butter and cheese. That is not considered bad from a health point of view, and it is not bad in terms of ruining the flavor. In fact, it does give flavor to butter and cheese. There is another kind of rancidity, however, which occurs because of oxidation of the fats. When the fats are exposed to air and light that favors the process, then they get oxidized and they become rancid. So oxidative rancidity is something you want to avoid. You don't want your fats to become rancid because of oxidative rancidity. The oxidative rancidity releases molecules that are called free radicals, which are harmful to the cells. They can damage the cells, they can damage the proteins and even the DNA, and are considered to be in large amounts when they're present in large numbers among the causes of aging and of diseases. Moreover, fats that have gone rancid because of oxidative rancidity have bad smell and taste. Okay, so this is the rancidity that you consider most commonly, you would call a fat rancid when it is rancid because of oxidative rancidity, not because of lipolytic rancidity. It's not commonly referred to as producing a rancid fat. Okay, so let's do together a review, and then we'll move on to talk about proteins. And say a few things about proteins. What is hydrogenation? Yes.
The industrial process of unsaturated fats.
That's right. It's an industrial process that aims to turn unsaturated fats into saturated fats. Saturated fats, that's right. What are trans fats? You're right there. It's easy for me to see when you raise your hand, but that's good. That's good. This is not just that I want to invite other students. Yes?
It's a byproduct of
Not necessarily. There are natural trans fats too. Well, yeah, right. Okay. When there are natural trans fatty acid in a fat, we don't call the fats trans fat. So yeah, I can accept that. It's a byproduct of the process of hydrogenation. Yes.
Natural trans fatty acids are found in small amounts of like milk and dairy products.
Say that louder, please.
Natural trans fatty acids are found in small amounts of milk and dairy products and like meat.
So sometimes a small amount of trans fats are naturally found in milk and dairy products, and in very small quantity in beef and lamb too, right? But we don't call milk fat or beef fat trans fats because of that small amount of trans fatty acids. When we talk about trans fats, we're referring to fats that have been partially hydrogenated, and they contain larger amounts of trans fatty acids because of partial hydrogenation. Okay? How are artificial trans fats produced, and why do they end up in your food? Well, they no longer do because now they're bad, but how did they end up in your food? We've answered that. We've already said that they're produced through the process of partial hydrogenation, and the use of partially hydrogenated fats in food products make them end up in the food. What are the two kinds of acidity? Do you remember the two names? Yeah, the map is just an exercise. Yes? That's right, lipolytic and oxidative acidity. Which of the two is bad for your health? The oxidative acidity. It's easy to avoid it because the fat becomes bad. It smells bad, it tastes bad. When you leave butter out of the refrigerator for a long time and exposing it to oxygen, you will see a layer that's more yellow than the rest of the batter forming on top of it. That's oxidative rancidity, and that's the part of the batter that has oxidated, and you don't want to eat that. Just get it off. The parts that's not oxidated. Okay? Alright, so let's quickly move on to proteins. So learning objectives here are to explain the molecular composition of proteins and their molecular building blocks, the amino acids. We want to explain the difference between essential, non-essential, and conditionally essential amino acids. We want to list the diverse functions proteins involve. So proteins are polymers composed of amino acids. The molecular building blocks of the three kinds of macronutrients. Now we know them all. Okay, what are the molecular building blocks of carbohydrates? Anyone who's actually watched the slideshow? Yes? Monosaccharides, yes. What is another name for monosaccharides? The general name for monosaccharides. Polysaccharides is a different kind of carbohydrates. If they are polysaccharides, they are not monosaccharides. Polysaccharides are composed of monosaccharides. Yeah. Simple sugars. Simple sugars. The sugars are of two kinds. There are simple and double. The monosaccharides are also called simple sugars, and the disaccharides are called double sugars. What is the most important kind of monosaccharide for food? Glucose. Yes, glucose. What are the molecular building blocks of fats? And by fats, I mean triglycerides. Yes. Glycerol and fatty acids. Yeah. What are the molecular building blocks of proteins? Yes? Amino acids. Very good. Okay. What is digestion? It's the breaking down of macronutrients into their molecular building blocks so that the molecular building blocks can be absorbed into our bodies. We'll see that next time, right? When we talk about food in the body. So what's an amino acid? An amino acid is a molecule composed of an amine group, which is nitrogen with two hydrogens, a carboxylic acid, a carbon with an oxygen and a hydrogen, and a side chain. The side chain is another group of atoms, and each amino acid will have its own distinctive side chain. So what differentiates the amino acids from each other is the side chain. All the amino acids have the amino group and the carboxylic acid group, and then each of them has its own side chain. And here you have a diagram of an amino acid. In which instead of representing individual atoms, the colored shapes represent groups of atoms, functional groups, as they are termed in organic chemistry. Amino acids link up with each other. They form chemical bonds to form long chains. They're called polypeptides because the bonds that join the acid group of one amino acid with the amine group of the other amino acid are called peptide bonds. So a chain of amino acids is called a polypeptide. And each polypeptide is distinguished by its different sequence of amino acids. What determines the sequence of amino acids in a protein is the DNA, is the genetic code of the DNA. Then the polypeptides, after they are formed, they fold spontaneously into very complicated shapes. And they twist and bend and twirl and curl up, forming the protein. So each protein is characterized by two things: its specific sequence of amino acids, that is its polypeptide, plus its shape, its distinctive shape. And since proteins have very specific functions to perform inside living organisms, in order to be able to perform those functions correctly, they have to have the right shape. If they lose the shape, they are no longer functional. And a protein that has lost its shape is called denatured. So what can we say about the amino acids? I would like you to know that is that there are 20 amino acids that form all the huge variety of proteins in our bodies, in our organisms. And they are coded by DNA in order to attach to each other in the exact sequences that will form the proteins. These 20 amino acids are subdivided into essential, non-essential, and conditionally essential. The essential ones are the ones that we need to obtain from food, because our bodies cannot produce them using other molecular bits or groups of atoms, or by transforming other amino acids. Conditionally essential amino acids are the ones that, under certain conditions, our bodies need to obtain them from food. We lose the ability to produce them in the insufficient quantities. And the remaining ones are non-essential. That is, even if we don't get them from food, our organism is capable of getting them by transforming the essential ones or by forming them with other molecular bits, molecular pieces. All right? So here is a table. You don't have to memorize all the names of the 20 amino acids, but it doesn't hurt to read them once so that you know what they say sound like, and maybe you will begin to familiarize with some of them. Yes? Those are the DNA bases. They are the building blocks of the molecule of DNA. They're not amino acids. So there are 9 that are essential. They are listed in the first column here. There are 4 that are not essential, and then there are the ones that are classified as conditionally essential. Food is considered to be of a high protein quality when it contains a large number of different amino acids, possibly the entire assortment of the 20 amino acids. But since we eat various diets, and we combine different foods in dishes and in meals, and in dietary patterns that we consume, it's not necessary for us to necessarily eat foods that contain all the 20 amino acids, because we can form a combination of foods that will, among themselves, in combination, provide us the full assortment of amino acids. And there are some traditional dishes that do precisely that provide you the full assortment of amino acids. Before we get to that, so we talk about the functional proteins. So proteins are the machinery of life. They really do all the activity inside living organisms. They are used for structure of body parts. For example, keratin that's needed for nails and for hair, collagen in skin, enzymes, very absolutely important to permit all the biochemical processes inside the cells. For example, the enzyme lactase that permits the digestion of lactose, the sugar in milk. And people who have lost the ability of producing lactase. All of us are born with the ability to produce lactase, because as infants, we have a diet of milk, mother's milk, right? So we are all born with the ability to digest milk because our bodies produce lactase. But as we grow up, a large number of people lose the ability to produce lactase or to produce it in sufficient quantities. And so they lose the ability to digest lactose in milk. They become lactose intolerant. In fact, the capacity to continue producing lactase past infancy is a genetic mutation that primitive humans did not have. That was acquired in the course of human evolution in prehistory by a group of humans, and it provided evolutionary advantage because now those people had acquired the ability to digest milk even past infancy. And so they had expanded the possibility of feeding themselves using animal milk past infancy. But large numbers of people have that genetic mutation and they are lactose intolerant. Some hormones are proteins. So somatotropin, which is the growth hormone that regulates growth, is a protein. Insulin, about which we will talk next time, which is the hormone that regulates the level of glucose in the blood, one of the two hormones that regulates the level of glucose in the blood, is a protein. Proteins are responsible for our voluntary movements and also voluntary movement of muscles in our body, actin and myosin. They are the agents of our immune system. They are the antibodies in our immune system. Some proteins are responsible for transport and cellular communication, so the transport of other substances or communication between cells. For example, hemoglobin, which is in red blood cells, it is the molecule that transports oxygen to the cells. It's an iron-containing protein. And finally, proteins can be used by cells as fuel, as sources of energy when needed. Of course, our cells prefer not to use proteins as energy because proteins are not very efficient in terms of energy. They require more work to be broken down for cellular respiration, to serve as input for cellular respiration. And they are needed, their amino acids are needed for so many other things that the organism prefers to preserve proteins and use instead carbohydrates and fats for energy. What are the food sources of proteins? Well, there are certain food sources, certain foods that are complete sources of all the essential amino acids. So eggs, meat, fish, milk and milk products, soybeans, quinoa and amaranth. Quinoa and amaranth being two of the ancient grains, that is, grains that were cultivated since ancient times by certain people in the Americas. And I think quinoa is not a grain actually. It's a different kind of plant, but it is used largely as a grain. There are other foods that are very good sources of proteins, and proteins themselves are sources of amino acids for our body, because when we digest proteins, the proteins get broken down into amino acids, and the amino acids are the ones that are used inside the cells. So these other foods are legumes or pulses. What are legumes or pulses? With using more common words, or with more common words. What are examples here? It's a kind of vegetable seeds, like Italian. Yes, that means yes. So they are a kind of vegetables, but what are some examples of legumes among the vegetables? Lentils and beans, yes. Beans, peas, and lentils, and green peas are legumes. Okay. So chickpeas, also varieties of beans, etc. Those are called legumes or pulses. Grains, wheat, corn, rice, amaranth, and others are grains, good sources of proteins, nuts, seeds. Some vegetables are also good sources of vegetable proteins, and some fruits. Excuse me. So, combinations of ingredients in dishes and diets can provide the full assortment of essential amino acids. For example, traditional dishes such as lentils and rice, pasta and beans, pasta and fagioli, which is one of the dishes of my own culinary culture. Help me out. I cannot remember what other combination of foods can provide the full assortment of essential amino acids. And so, traditional nutritional diets sometimes surprise us, because they are so nutritionally wise, even though they were invented at times when modern nutritional knowledge was still far too young.
Oh, there you have it.
All right, let's do quickly the review and then we're ready for this week. What are the building blocks of proteins?
You don't mind going to Granite City?
Amino acids. What is the difference between essential, non-essential, and conditionally essential amino acids? I'm going to leave the answers to you. You can find them in the slides. If you cannot find them in the slides or in the readings, then ask me. What are functions of proteins in the body? Give a few specific examples. And what are